Thanks very much, Geoff. Before we open the floor to questions, there is a question I'd like to ask myself, and it's a question about the novel as a genre and about digressions. It's often said of you that you are, as a writer, a law unto yourself, that you are sort of a writer sui generis. But when we look over the annals of English literature, we find a surprising number of writers who are in fact laws unto themselves and writers sui generis. And if you have to put them all in a class and try to give a name to them, I suppose we would call them Shandians. That is to say, they all come out of Tristram Shandy, out of the novel, which is so suspicious of the novel that it becomes a novel about the problem of writing a novel. What I wonder is whether you see yourself in this Shandian line, but also what you think about the Shandian solution to the strictures of genre, to the way in which the novel as a genre tends to impose a template on you, which you may not always be happy with.
Well, I guess in that weird way, the relation between the writing of the past is not constant. So at various times, certain writers are brought into a more immediate relation with the present than at others. So I think for me, in a way, of course I'd read Tristram Shandy at university, but he was brought absolutely into the present, it seems to me, by Milan Kundera. And Kundera, as you know, was really, he had this, he said, well, it was so weird, really, that right at the beginning of the development of the novel, we had Lawrence Sterne and a possible way to go. But he said instead that potential was kind of abandoned to a large extent. And we went, I think Kundera's phrase, he said, people started to devote themselves to bicycle race narrative. So really, in that weird way, it was, so Kundera and Lawrence Sterne are very close to me. And something strange happened to me when I was reading Kundera, really, that I found increasingly that I wasn't really enjoying the novel, the novel parts, the obviously fiction parts of Kundera's books. There almost seemed like there seemed to be increasingly a kind of Benny Hill quality to them. It always seemed to involve these sort of doctors chasing around nurses in their underwear kind of thing. And I found what I really liked in Kundera's books was I liked the digressions so much that I wished we could just abandon the novel parts and just have the digressions. And of course he duly obliged with that book, Testaments Betrayed, I think it was called. And I do have an enormous fondness for digressions. Some of you will have seen that in the papers yesterday there's a new biography published of the great Polish war correspondent Richard Kapuscinski, and it's talking about the way that maybe he wasn't a reliable reporter at all, that he made a lot of stuff up, and that's all true. But it seems to me that actually in this one of his many great achievements was that he made the digression absolutely key to reporting. I mean, there were wonderful digressions in all of his books. And then, I suppose, really, in terms of digressions, that would be. There's I think one of the great books of the 20th century would be Rebecca West's Black Lamb, Grey Falcon. Rebecca West as a novelist means nothing to me, but I think she really is a great writer. On this book, on the basis of this book, which will be, it's rather off-putting, it's a 1,200-page book about Yugoslavia. And I had no particular special interest in Yugoslavia, but the whole book, nearly all of those 1,200 pages is 1,200 pages of digression. So I like the way that sort of the digression can almost stop being a digression and become the chief sort of component of something. And I mean, just to answer the last part of your question, John, I mean, what I've become somewhat impatient with as a reader as well as a writer is the way that I often don't feel that the conventional, that sometimes I feel the process of novelization is not the way of bringing out the expressive potential of the material. It seems to me actually that we all think of this idea of cliche as applying just at linguistic level. But it seems to me that you've got to be careful that you don't think in terms of cliches of form or even cliches of conception.
If you would like to ask questions, please come to the microphone in the aisle here.
Some of the writers have generously spoken about how the creative process works, and I have a sense that I'm definitely not an artist, because they spoke about how when they're walking around town, stories are going off in their heads. And another writer spoke about when she was 8, she was writing stories and so forth. Can you just, and would you share with us your creative process and how things come to you?
Sure, yeah. Well, there's several ways to answer that. In terms of the walking around, actually, while we were my wife and I went back to Venice several times, and she said at one point, I don't know how you do it. And I thought, it's always lovely when you get a sort of testament to your genius. And I thought, this is going to be very nice after we've been married sort of 8 years. And she said, you're not capable of making anything up, but you don't notice anything either. And that would be a classic example, I think, of what one might call the wifely school of literary criticism. And as a writer, actually, I do notice a few things, and I'm not very good at making things up from scratch. And as I think I said in one of the other sessions, for me, the stuff I write is only that far away from what's happened in life. But for me, all the fun of writing is in that inch. So what happens in the books, it's never a straightforward transcription of what's gone on. But it's very, very, but the line between what's fact and fiction is blurred. So for example, we've got this, Geoff with a G, my name, Geoff with a J is the main character's name. Now, more generally for me, because I've written all these different kinds of books, it's strange really, because the whole process of education tends to be it funnels you towards deeper, it's a constant refinement of specialisation. So, for example, in England, somebody of my age, I did, 8 O-levels, 3 A-levels, a degree in English, and then you keep going down that ever-narrowing path until you do something, often the incredibly specialised thing of a PhD. And that's the way education tends. And it's funny, because I think, in a way, it would be better if it went the other way. If you asked me what kind of writer I was, I'd say I'm a writer like Susan Sontag, somebody who's interested in everything. And I've had lots of interests, and for me, typically there's been something I've been really passionate about. So, for example, in the late 80s, I loved jazz so much. I just loved jazz. And because I don't have any understanding of music, the books I read to satisfy my passion, they meant nothing to me. So when they said he went from a upper C to a low D or whatever, it might as well have been in Greek. Anyway, so I duly went I thought, okay, I would have these kind of moments. I'd be lying in the bath, and then I'd think, I'm going to write a great book about jazz. And then, so I went to New York and tried to write this book, and I had there a really, what has been such an experience I keep coming back to. I ended up looking through the archive at the Institute of Jazz Studies, and everybody who writes a book about jazz goes there. And I was talking to the person, and he said, well, what kind of book is it going to be? I said, I don't know, really, I don't know. And then he said, well, what about you? Are you a jazz critic? I say, no. And he says, are you anyway, the no's keep piling up. So eventually he says, well, what are your credentials for writing this book? And I said, well, I like listening to it. And now, in a way, it seems to me that is all you need. It's not what you know, it's what your passion gives you the potential to discover. But also, that's the thing about these ghettos of special interest, you see. Here was a man who knew a great deal about jazz, but I'm pretty certain that he'd not read Roland Barthes' book about photography, Camera Lucida, one of the great books about photography. And basically, Roland Barthes bases his book about photography around a few pictures of his mum that he particularly likes. And so although my answer was on the one hand pitiful, it was actually also more knowledgeable, really. There's always some kind of interest, and the book, what the books record for me is the kind of journey of discovery, the journey that gets me to the point at which I'm qualified to write the book that I've just finished, if you see what I mean. So hopefully the books have that kind of they retain some of that quality of discovery. I became more and more interested in photography, and then I wrote this book called The Ongoing Moment. It's a sort of history of photography, and now I really do know quite a bit about photography. In terms of where things, I can't overestimate the importance of place. So when we arrived in Varanasi, it was the place that was, really did it for me. And I really like being in places, to sum it up, places where time has stood its ground, where history becomes manifest as geography. And the most intense experience of that I've ever had, really one of the peak experiences of my life, and that's what I'm interested in, peak experiences. I was in Paris trying to write my version of, I'm always doing these novels which are versions of somebody else's novels. I was trying to do a version of Fitzgerald's Tender is the Night, and I wasn't making any progress. And I thought, well, I'd always been interested in the First World War, so I went up to the battlefield cemeteries. Didn't really know where I was going to be, and then came to the Edwin Lutyens Memorial at Thiepval, and there in these huge letters, it's this the missing of the Somme, it says. It's this memorial to the 60,000 people who died in the course of the Battle of the Somme, whose bodies were either never recovered or just disappeared. So it's just an incredible place. And as always, so it's a very simple question, really. So I asked myself, well, what brought me here? Why is this place affecting me so powerfully? What brought me here? And then, of course, in order to answer that question, you have to ask another, which is what baggage, cultural, autobiographical, historical, am I carrying with me? So I like the way that this curiosity kind of thing is always generating new questions. And I should say, actually, that I'm a sort of obsessive person, and it seems to me that in a way, the obsessive, in many ways, is the opposite of if you're obsessive, you're not addictive. The addict would, having written a book about the Somme, would then write one about Passchendaele, or maybe. But for me, it's I move on to new things. Sorry, that was an unbelievably long answer.
What do you think are the most frequent or biggest misconceptions about your work?
Oh, that's a great question. How long have we got? It's funny, really. I really don't want to be. I'm really not one of these difficult writers, but it's just this way that one is being. I almost always resent any kind of way of being described. So at various times I'm referred to as the British humorist, and I don't like that, because I'm not that, because I've written a very scholarly history of photography. At the same time, I really don't like it when they describe me as the photography writer, or so the key thing for me, which was so it took ages, actually. There was no continuity at all between the various readerships for my books. Jazz, as I think I said this the other day, jazz fans read the jazz book, people interested in the First World War read the blah, 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 and so on. And it's only really recently that it's come to people's attention that actually there's this whole kind of thing. I'm sorry to use the pompous word. There is this body of work which actually is maybe unified by the way that it was written by one person, and it really is a very unusually wide-ranging body of work. So I guess that's the thing. I don't like to be identified just by one thing. My great mentor, John Berger, has exactly the same. I've actually inherited all of the kind of all of the mistakes he's made. And I suppose in a way though that I exacerbate this because I feel on these things you've got to entertain the troops a bit. So I tend at these things to always read funny bits, so I can see how I might be thought of as a comic writer. But I hope that's not all I am. Thank you for that nice question.
2 years ago, a number of the writers described their experiences at the equivalent function, the Writers' Week of 2 years ago. And when I was reading your novel, your diptych, I was reminded that a lot of what you said about the Venice Biennale was similar to what the writers had said about the experiences here 2 years ago. And I wondered, in view of the emphasis that you have placed on the importance of the city, whether we can look forward to reading a Geoff in Adelaide.
I'd like to think I've pre-answered that question by, the Geoff in... I was meant to be writing a book about tennis, and that was, and my publishers liked that because they realised they could finally get some continuity. Geoff and tennis. No, but you're absolutely... you're right about the similarities between these kind of things, and I guess this is the gamble with writing, isn't it? That you want to arrive at some kind of universal truth. So, okay, it might turn out that, the Venice Biennale, it's about the art world. But the thing is, I think it is, as you say, it's a kind of universal experience. And, quite early on, I became persuaded of something really quite simple, which is this, that if you want to arrive at some kind of universal truth, the chances are that you're going to do that by remaining absolutely faithful to the contingencies of your own experience and the vagaries of your own nature. So, I would claim that some kind of universal experience is being described within the very specific context of the Venice Biennale, and that experience is the universal thing of the kind of it's. I like festivals, and it's this kind of place where I like the way that for a week or however long it is, a city is transformed into something more than just a city, and that happens irrespective of whether it's a literary, art or music festival. It seems to me. No, but there's no shortage of stuff to drink, is there?
Okay, sure. Geoff, picking up on the last question, one of the characters in Geoff in Venice says something like, "The art world, the music business, makes one think, doesn't it?" And I just wondered, is this the literature world or is this the literary business?
Like all the sort of good questions, of course, I don't have an answer to that. What do you think, John?
Further questions.
Hi. You strike me as a rather unconventional writer. Without wanting to describe you now, you said you don't like to be described. What are you aiming for? What are you striving for?
No, that's a great question to which I do have an answer. It's funny, you see. What I've not done, I haven't set out to be perverse or difficult. So, for example, when the yoga book was sort of quite successful as a travel book, and then I really wish I'd taken a camera into the meeting I had with my publisher when he said, "So, what have you been working on?" I said, "Yeah, I think I've made some real progress with my new book." He said, "Great, what's it going to be?" Hoping it was going to be basically yoga too, or yoga for people, blah blah blah. And I said, "Yeah, it's this history of photography." And in his great polite way, he managed to not just say, "Oh shit." I mean, but there was just this flicker of absolute horror as he quickly did the math and realised that this was commercially just a dreadful possibility. So what am I after? I mean, and I'm not trying just to make life difficult for my publishers, but I am very much in it for me, and it's a way of, as I say, of finding out. It's a way for me of answering certain kind of questions that interest me, and it's a way of occupying my time writing and giving my life a sort of purpose and meaning, giving my life the illusion of purpose and meaning that it would not otherwise have. So that's it really. And you know, I've got to the point now where, of course, it's. I mean, I don't have a job or anything, and I think it's no accident that I don't, because I really want this right. I really want it to be a sort of high wire act with no safety net. I mean, I want it to just be the writing that gives my life meaning. You know, and if I wasn't you know, if you know, I like the way that it's the writing or nothing really. So I think that's what's it gives one an identity, I guess, and it also it's a way of engaging with the world. Thank you. Well.
I just ask you to go back to Mr. Coetzee started off asking about the novel, and I'd just like to ask for a bit more of your thoughts on that, and whether it's, to be really blunt, you know, whether it's the form that needs changing or whether it's simply that you enjoy writing that way.
Yeah, I think the key thing is that there was a time, let's say, obviously in the early part of the 20th century, well, throughout the 19th and the 20th century, the novel was really absolutely where the action was. You know, if you had any, it was the ultimate testing ground. And of course, you know, great novels continue to be written. Great novels, often in a completely traditional way. There's no doubt about that. But I feel that there's the assumption that the novel is the only place where your literary worth is tested is being shown to be an increasingly kind of provincial or parochial one. And you know, I'm really struck by the way that you know, for me, Kapuscinski is such a hugely important figure, because he's really showing how much can be. You know, I don't think Kapuscinski ever wrote a novel, but there's no doubt in my mind that he's a really great writer. And I think it's nice that we live in this time when other options are becoming available. But I emphasise, I don't want to be. I'm not the latest in that long line of people who are saying, right, the novel's dead, the novel's finished. All I'm saying is that the novel is not the only form available.
I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. Geoff, thanks so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you all.